You're listening to Alternative Future Radio, home of the weird, resting place of the paranormal. We'll take you to the furthest reaches of the galaxy and beyond. Strange phenomena, aliens, psychics, cryptozoology, conspiracy, holistic health, and UFOs. Alternative Future Radio, where spooky just got weird.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Out There Hour show. Fantastic guest today. Brace yourselves.
Time now for the Out There Hour on Alternative Future Radio. The Out There Hour with Basil and Mark. www.alternativefutureradio.com.
Yay! Yay!
Yay! Good morning.
Good evening.
And good afternoon.
Are we going to go through this every time?
No, we're just going to introduce our lovely guest today.
Go on.
Pat Chouinard.
Pat Chouinard.
We're talking about ancient and lost civilizations.
Yeah, more than you would think. People think of Atlantis.
Oh, there's a lot more than Atlantis. The pyramids.
Yeah.
There's the Ellora in India. It's beautifully intricate. What would you call it? It's not a building. It's like a platform.
Yeah,
It's like something out of Doctor Who.
That's a new one to me, that one.
It's incredible. Oh, well.
Then you've got the biblical alien-type people, like the Nephilim and all that kind of stuff. Because there's a bit of a UFO alien link there going on.
Yes, and all these ancient carvings of space-suited humanoids.
Yes, we shall have to ask him about that.
So we're back to the same question that we've asked, that we've had a few times on this show. Were we an advanced race?
Yes.
Much more advanced than we are now?
Could have been.
Has there been a great global disaster?
Some kind of cataclysm.
Were a few stragglers left behind?
Could have been you. Could have been me.
Could have been me. Is that what we're...
Are we the stragglers? That surely we should be survivors, not stragglers.
Well, survival, but in a whole new system now, it seems, from where we used to be.
Ooh, don't get started. Shall we get him on?
Let's get him on.
Do you know what comes first?
Advert.
Why not help support this station by buying the new Alternative Future Radio Android application? Not only can you download all the latest shows, but you can go back into time and get the archive shows too, and it's just $1.99. PayPal will bill you in your usual currency if you don't use dollars.
Okay, so hopefully we should now be joined on the line by Patrick Chouinard. Get it right. Pat, do we have you there? Can we call you Pat?
Yes, fine with me.
We weren't sure if you were a Patrick or a Pat.
Patrick is a writer, a freelance journalist, a former producer of Archaeology TV, the editor-in-chief of the new Archaeological Review. He now lives in Florida.
Yes.
Where we're speaking to him at the moment.
How are you doing, Pat?
Hey, I'm doing great. How are you?
We're not doing too bad. We're not doing too bad. Our summer is probably not quite as pleasant as yours, but we're getting through.
So,
well, our summer is very pleasant, but very hot. Very, very hot.
Only wish we had that problem.
98 in the height of summer. Could get higher than that even. So we've got it up to over 100.
You can grow to dislike people, Pat. Oh, we never see 100 here in a million years.
Well, as we were chatting pre-show,
yes.
To sum it up in a nutshell, to put it very simply in one line, we're talking about ancient civilizations.
Ancient, lost, mystery, missing.
And all these amazing and incredible artifacts and remnants all over the globe.
There are some very odd objects that don't quite add up around the world.
And also the evidence of in the scriptures, in the Old Testament, and even skeletal remains of giants. Yeah,
giants is a fantastic one, Pat. Basil and I were just talking about it actually before we came in the studio. We were talking about the Old Testament, and Basil was telling me how they didn't really teach him much about it at school. And the Nephilim, I think, are mentioned by name.
Nephilim, yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that, Pat, because they're very, very interesting.
Well, first of all, before we go into the Nephilim, I'd like to say a little bit about my theory about giants.
Oh, do, yeah.
And it's a little different than some of the theories you might hear from other people and other scholars and other experts, because I believe that all the myths and legends of history, contrary to being the primitive inventions of a backward and credulous human race, who needed to come out of the caves and barely be able to put things together, and needed ancient aliens to come down from the heavens to teach them civilization. I believe that humans already had a substantial civilization and a substantial amount of sophistication in writing, history, engineering, medicine, astronomy. Yeah. And I think that what they were doing is, rather than making things up, that they were writing down eyewitness accounts of what they were seeing, and that's what we have today as myths that have been passed down to us orally from the people who survived the great cataclysmic age of 10,000 years ago. So basically what I think is all the myths and legends that exist in history are in fact true, and that there were in fact beings who evolved on this planet over millions of years who were so powerful and so godlike that we have recorded them in our records as gods and as giants, and we worship them as such, not misconstruing extraterrestrial encounters as giants, but actually seeing real giants that once existed, and that all the myths are telling us that giants were very real, very present, and that there were many close encounters with these beings between our ancient ancestors and them.
Well, a previous guest of ours, Edmund Marriage, had mentioned that there were several global disasters in history, and one of the reasons he put forward for a larger man or a larger animal was that the atmosphere was actually quite different before some of these.
Yeah, that was a new one on me, actually, I must say.
So he said he thought some people were actually much, much bigger.
Now, are you familiar with the Horror-Biger theory?
No, that's a new one.
Okay, that theory basically states that contrary to the way it is now, there was a series of astronomical alignments that were quite different than the astronomical alignments of today. That among them was a tertiary moon, a different moon that was much larger and much closer to the Earth and was exacting gravitational influence on the Earth. And it is this gravitational influence that ultimately resulted in gigantism in many life forms throughout the planet. That's one theory. Another theory that could amount to many of the gigantism present in ancient civilizations and ancient cultures, but also in ancient Earth, prehistoric Earth, if you will, is X-rays from cosmic rays from outer space that created mutation in our evolutionary DNA. And this mutations from cosmic rays formed gigantism. It has been recorded by Callisimo, who wrote a book called Timeless Earth, that this in fact happened. That there was,
would that have been from solar flares or something like that?
Yeah, exactly, from solar flares. And there was another incident where actually there were cosmic rays stored within the Earth. And when a volcano happened, and I think it was Mount Pelelipe and out in the Caribbean, that volcano erupted. It spewed all kinds of radioactive material into the air. And this radioactive material not only transformed the life forms that exist on the island, but also even increased the height of the researchers that were on the island to study it, because the cosmic rays were so big. They grew by 2 inches each one of them.
How odd.
So there's definite correlation between cosmic rays and cosmic radiation and gigantism.
Well, there are so many descriptions of giants and large humans in ancient scripture. I mean, even the Bible mentions the Nephilim.
Yeah.
And the Anunnaki.
I'm not sure if they're mentioned in the Bible. I think they're from Sumeria. Are they? Maybe you're.
Yeah, they're from Sumeria. They're from the Anu Milish.
Yeah.
And Anu Milish is a ancient Sumerian text. It's their creation myth. It discusses Marduk and Tiamat and how Marduk slayed Tiamat and created the world out of her corpse. The upper half became the heavens, the lower half became the earth of the body, which actually correlates to the sequel I'm writing right now, Two Giants, which was the last book I did. It's a book on dragons, and it talks about the mythology of dragons. It goes from the same premise I have about giants, I transform into a premise on dragons. And Tiamat was a dragon. It's one of the earliest recorded dragons in Western civilization. Eastern dragons go far back into antiquity, back at least another 10,000 years. But in Western traditions, dragons only go back maybe 6,000 or 7,000 years.
That like King George and all this kind of thing. There's a lot of it.
That's much later.
Pat, it's probably worth pointing out that if people think there are no mentions of giants in the Bible, you only need look at David and Goliath. Goliath was a giant in the Bible. There are a number of them.
And the interesting thing about that, they actually found a pottery shard recently that discussed the pottery shard with Proto-Canaanite script written on it, and it said this pottery or this vessel belongs to Goliath. It was found in Gath, which was the city that Goliath came from.
Yep, I've heard of that.
It was found in Israel about 10 years ago. And this pottery shard has been known as the Goliath pottery shard. And it was just written right there with his name on it, and it seems to verify the story of Goliath to some extent. Now, the interesting thing is that there's much more diversity in giant myths than you might think. There is myths in the Fijian Islands of giants who came from the lost civilization of Barutu that sunk into the Pacific Ocean 1 million years ago, and their names were the Hittite. They taught the Fijians the aspect of civilization and built a 20-foot triumphal arch. Please translate that into meters. And if you also have the Thai in New Guinea, they had an ancient race that taught them civilization. You have the Arawaka race of the Inca that taught them civilization and was similar to the Titans of mythology. You have of course, you had the Greek Titans, who were the first giants in Greek mythology. You have the Datyas, which were the Hindu beliefs of giants. They were similar also to the Rakshas, which were more gruesome and more diabolical, but were also giants. And then you also have the giant serpent-like humans who were called the Nagas in Hindu mythology. So in Hindu mythology, we have 3 or 4 different classes of giants, and we just have the world over a vast amount of giant lore from every, the New World has them, the Pacific Islands have them, the Asia, Northern Europe, Southern Europe, Africa, Australia, they all have giant myths of some type.
So all over the place, but you mentioned the Greek mythology. It's probably something that people are more familiar with through movies like Clash of the Titans and so forth. Yeah. But I think I've heard you mention in an interview, you were alluding to the fact that the things like the Minotaur. Yeah. And what else was there?
There are a number of the Titans.
They were actually, you think, could have been real.
Yes, I do, and I think that the Titans are example of a very ancient, sophisticated race that once existed on this planet in antiquity. And they are the beings who many of us worshipped as gods.
Would they have been people like Medusa and the Kraken and that kind of thing? Are they?
I think those things were real too, because I think they all had a basis in reality, even if they're however masked or distorted by the passage of time. I think that they were real. I think there really was beings and creatures of that strange and unusual nature that once existed on this planet, and our ancestors were writing down what they were experiencing and seeing, rather than just making up stories as mainstream scientists tend to think.
But I mean, something like the Minotaur, if it was real, would it have evolved, or was it somehow genetically engineered, or have you any theories on that?
Well, there's two possibilities. One, it could have evolved on this planet, or two, it could have been preempted by extraterrestrials or something like that. I tend to think the former. Yeah. I tend to think that it would have evolved on this planet, that it would have been definitely a form of being that could trace its ancestry back to prehistoric times. And I think that many of the myths and traditions of Greek mythology relate to real creatures. There was an incident in ancient times where there were the earliest archaeologists, and they were coming out of Greece and Rome about 2,000 years ago. And these archaeologists, these primitive archaeologists, were exhuming the bones of who they referred to as the giants and heroes of antiquity and the gods of antiquity. And they were finding gigantic bones. Now, modern scholars like to say that they were unearthing dinosaur bones or mammoth bones or rhinoceros bones, but anything but the giants. But it's quite clear from the clarity of their reports and the descriptions that they're given of these enormous bones that they were in fact discovering early giants at a very early time. So it's amazing.
Well, when they speak about dinosaurs now, I'm 40 years of age now, but when I was a child, every dinosaur that I grew up with or recognized as being a dinosaur is now apparently completely wrong. Yeah. Dinosaurs were not what I was told they were when I was a kid. They're completely different creatures now.
It keeps changing. They said that they were stupid, brains the size of peas, and now they hunt in packs and work things out. So it's constantly changing.
Well, things change over time. I mean, they learn new things and they discard old theories. And that's basically how science works. Science is a self-correcting process, as Carl Sagan once called it. But at the same time, even though science is a self-correcting process, you have to understand that it has to be a self-correcting process. And many of the academics ignore this. And when new theories come along that threaten what they believe in, they discard it and they debunk it quite zealously, with much zeal and much ambition. And they don't see it as a possibility that they were wrong. Well, science is a self-correcting mechanism. Then it stands to reason that they're going to find things that to prove them wrong. They only want to accept the things which fit into their worldview, and that's all they want to go to. But I say, let's start letting some of these other theories come into play and show what they have to offer, because they have a significant amount of information and data supporting them. There were many examples of this. We know, of course, from the from the popular movie Raiders of the Lost Ark in the final scene. They're rolling this crate, which contains the Ark of the Covenant, into a vast warehouse containing thousands, tens of thousands of crates stacked one by one, all containing anomalous finds. And it's probably one of the most famous scenes in any movie related to science fiction or ancient mysteries. And it, that's, I believe that there really are places like that in this world in which, specifically the American government and the British government and many other governments throughout the world are actively engaged in creating, so to speak.
It's interesting that you should say that, because we've talked before with other guests on completely different topics about what the Nazis were up to, and that film's not entirely fictional, because the Nazis were looking for relics and they were investigating supernatural and paranormal.
Well, the SS chief Heinrich Himmler, Reichsfuhrer SS Heinrich Himmler, he was actively involved in this, and he created what he called the Annenerbe. And the Annenerbe related to Ancestral Heritage Society. And this Ancestral Heritage Society went all around the world trying to find artifacts that proved the superiority of the ancient Aryan race and its relation to the ancient Germans. And that the ancient Germans were, in fact, first throughout the world. I often say to my listeners that he would have been delighted to death to find out that they have Caucasian mummies in China and Caucasian mummies and Caucasian remnants throughout the world, because that would have only improved his theory. But, he had a lot of spurious things as well that were absolutely wrong and were absolutely crazy and were basically based on his own theories. There was two remains in the bog, known as the bog people or the peat people of Northern Europe, and there were two bodies that were found buried in peat.
Is this Pete Marsh? Is it the guy they called him Pete Marsh?
This guy who they found, there were two guys, and since they were two guys and they were found close to one another, he assumed they were homosexuals and assumed that they were brutally that they were brutally assassinated or executed for being homosexuals. So that justified his extermination of the homosexual population of Germany and Northern Europe, which,
that's just skewed logic. That's absolutely insane.
Homosexual. How can you tell out of two remains that actually show no evidence of that whatsoever? How can you conclude that those are homosexuals? There was nothing to that. But he had some interesting theories, specifically about Thule, which I happen to agree with. And I hate to say that because of his ominous history. But he did have a few interesting points, which I find quite fascinating from an empirical standpoint.
You mentioned 10,500 BC just there, a date that I've heard a lot of, particularly. We had a chap on last week, Edmund Marriage, who talked about, I think he said 10,830 BC, but that's not split hairs, it's quite a long time ago. But that date rings through history around the world. Have you any thoughts on that date? Because some say there was a cataclysm, and it's...
That's about the date that the ice cap started melting. The glacial meltdown of 10,000, 12,000 years ago, in which there was a massive rising of sea level, which inundated millions of square kilometers of land. Yeah. And this flooding of land could have flooded the lost civilization. And that's basically what Graham Hancock has been after now for the for the past 10 years or so.
Yeah, I read his books about that. Could that have been the Great Flood?
Yes, that could have been one of the Great Floods, but I don't prescribe to the theory that there was one Great Flood. I believe there's a succession of floods over a long period of time.
Ah, interesting.
So established science would have us believe that our ancestors were primitives and they dreamed up these gods and they built these temples. But the problem is, if they were so primitive, how could they build these incredibly mathematically correct structures?
Exactly. That is exactly right. And that's why I believe that they were writing down what they were seeing. They were not dummies. They were not just inventing myths. They had a basis in fact.
Yeah.
Because they were recording, ancient peoples recorded what they saw. And they did things literally. They didn't have they weren't writing science fiction, but you listen to some of these academics, and they just want to say, oh, well, they just want to fill their lives with fantasy.
Yeah.
And things I don't agree with that.
Well, I mean, you've only got to look, never mind the pyramids, leaving the pyramids aside for one moment, but I have been having a little bit of a look at some ancient structures, and I've been absolutely fascinated. The Ellora in India, this Indian architecture cut out of rock, it's so intricate and so huge. It's amazing. The ancient city of Petra in Jordan with these beautiful monuments and temples cut into the cliff faces.
Are you familiar with Göbekli Tepe?
No.
Okay, Göbekli Tepe was found in the late 1980s. It was really starting to be excavated in the 90s. And for years, the standard rule of thumb was that civilization began 3,500 BC tops, and that 12,000 years ago, or 14,000 years ago, mankind was nothing but primitive bands of nomads hiding in caves and barely able to create pottery or anything, or have any form of organized religion or culture or civilization. Yet 12,000 BC, they built an immense temple that was discovered in southern Turkey at a place called Göbekli Tepe. And it is a vast complex of 16 megaliths in stone circled. It's definitely a temple. It has motifs carved on the side of each megalith. And some people even think that it might have been a monument to Noah's Ark at that time, because it depicted so many animal creatures and strange creatures that we've never seen before, but they were depicted on the side of these temple walls. And it's 12,000 BC. It's one of the oldest structures in the world. Now, you got to relate that to the pyramids, which are often considered one of the oldest structures. They date back to 3,000 BC. Then you have to look at Stonehenge, which is about 600 years earlier. Then you have to go back. It's amazing that there's almost over 7,000 years difference between the pyramids and the building of Göbekli Tepe. It's incredibly ancient, but the important thing to remember is it should not have been there. Mainstream archaeologists always said that we never had that type of technology that far back in history. And now they're just befungled. But at the same time, even though they know of this site, and it's been on National Geographic, one of the most mainstream publications you can get, and it's been on Nova and numerous other publications and documentaries on television. But the interesting thing is they still cling to the 3,500 BC as the origin of civilization in their textbooks, in college, in high school, in elementary school. They're still teaching our children and our future academics the standard lie that civilization only goes back to 3,500 BC.
Well, looking at the Ellora and Petra, looking at the carvings and the intricate carvings and the huge amount of them, it's very hard to believe it was done with a hammer and a chisel.
Yeah.
Have you any thoughts on that?
Christopher Dunn is a firm believer that there was ancient machining available to our ancestors. And he has shown a lot of evidence to support that. And he wrote a book, Ancient Technologies. And I recommend that anyone who's interested in that subject definitely get that book, because it explains it clearly.
There is a theory that the boat pits, which are just at the bottom of the pyramids at Giza, there are two big indentations in the ground. Some people, the official story is that they were boats there, solar boats, but some people say that they were actually pits for a giant lathe or a saw almost, and that's what they used to cut the stone. Because I've been to Giza, and I've been to Petra and a few other places, and those stones are pretty big to be using with chisels. Now I know you would get a lot done with a few thousand people and a good few years to do it in, but they are pretty big to have been cut by hand, and some kind of diamond-tipped saw would be...
It's the precision. It's the precision also for the carving. And you get to what Christopher Dunn was pointing out extensively, that there was a precision involved in the carving of the monuments. The fact that they were so clean and precise and well thought out, that they had to use machine to do that, that primitive stone tools would have created too jagged of the edges, and there would be too much wear on the side of where the chiseling would have taken place. That there's absolutely no way that primitive tools could have made things of such precision and beauty.
Yeah, I've seen some of the stonework in the Mayan ruins, and some of the stonework there it's got tolerances greater than modern engineering can even hope to come near. It's thousands of inches. It's tiny.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of ancient technology, I was just looking at a thing recently, a little clip about this little gold aeroplane found near the Magdalena River in Colombia. It's dated between 500 and 800 CE. What does CE mean?
BCE mean?
Yeah, before Common Era.
Ah. But this it was a small thing, like a toy. But actually, what happened? Some German aviation specialists built a scale model, and it actually had incredible aerodynamic qualities. It could fly.
Ah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was definitely an interesting discovery, and it's not alone. There was the Egyptian discovery called the Giza bird. It was a glider, and they always thought the bird was a bird. It was always just kind of fluffed off as a bird, but it actually is a glider because it has a rudder, and its nose is more like an airplane's. So when you actually look at the structure of this bird, it's clearly not a bird, but it resembles more precisely like a plane or a glider. So they made it into a workable form, just like they did with the Colombian discovery, and it too flew with great success. And so it's kind of interesting when you consider the fact that you have, these flying machines in Colombia. You have them in Egypt, and then you have the Vimana, which are records in the Sanskrit writings of India of flying machines existing 50,000 years ago. It's depicted in the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, and the Rig Veda.
Yep.
These Vimanas, or flying craft that the ancients once possessed.
I've got a question for you, Pat. It just came up while you were talking about ancient Hindu things there. Lots of the pictures of ancient Hindu gods depict them as being blue. We've thought about that before. I mean, doesn't that strike anybody as being a little bit odd?
Well, not odd at all, because diversity is the main driving force of evolution, and we know from studying the genome of Neanderthals, and we did in fact decode the Neanderthal genome several years ago now, and we know that their diversity level was extremely high. So you have to understand something. About 50,000 years ago, there was a major cataclysm here on this planet, and most of the human race went extinct. There were just very few survivors. There were about 100 survivors in total.
Yes.
And at that time, before that, we had incredible diversity. Now, you look at chimpanzees. Chimpanzees have a diversity level of about 9%. we have a diversity level of 1%. Now, the Neanderthals had a diversity level of 13%. They were probably the most genetically diverse creatures on Earth. So it's not impossible that other beings with a higher diversity level could have blue skin. They could have other features, other skin coloration, other hair types.
Could they even have been giants?
And could have been giants, exactly.
But I've heard you mention about races that may have disappeared. I think I've read or heard somewhere of a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Native American in North America.
Yes.
I think
there's much evidence to support that. There was the Kennewick Man. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No. Tell us, Pat, what is that?
Kennewick Man was discovered in 1996 by Kevin Deasy and his brother, David Deasy. And they were wading in the Columbia River up not too far from British Columbia on the border in Washington State. And they discovered a pile of bones, and they were very interested, and they went to the park ranger, and the park ranger called in a forensic scientist, Jim Chatters. And Jim Chatters ended up looking it over and concluded that it was, in fact, racially a Caucasian. And he figured that, well, this must be a very recent deposit, maybe a murder victim. But as he's looking at it, he noticed a arrow in its side, and he said, well, an arrow, so this must be a pioneer settler that met an untimely demise at the hands of a Native American. But as he examined it further and carbon dated it, turned out to be 9,000 BC.
Wow.
Far before any white or Caucasian people were supposed to be in North America. He confirmed that it was, in fact, a Caucasian, and the reconstruction of the face looked more like Patrick Stewart from Star Trek The Next Generation than Native American.
Yeah.
You look at his face, and I tell you, it looks just like he's engaged. Engaged. And we are engaging. We're engaging to the new era in which a new paradigm will be installed, and it's discoveries like this that really bring it to the forefront. But the interesting thing is that you have Kennewick Man, and he's not alone. There is Spirit Caveman. He is another find, which also is part of this tradition. You have in Windover Pond, a site which I was involved with what's his name? Greg something or other. It's been a while. He used to frequent the Central Gulf Coast Archaeological Society. His name is Greg Fox, I think it is. Anyhow, I went there to talk with him at one time, and he said that they found skulls in the peat out at Titusville at Windover Pond. And when they examined inside of the skull, they found intact brain matter.
Wow.
And this intact brain matter was tested. It turned out that it had links to Europeans. It had European racial DNA decoded for the first time in Florida. So there's been enormous presence of European and haplogroup X and other European DNA throughout North America that's either coming from interbreeding with populations of European settlers and Native Americans, or it could be far more ancient. And when I say it's far more ancient, we're finding remnants and remains of Native Americans that do not fit standard mold for Native Americans, and their DNA seems to indicate European origins.
Pat, we've had a few people on the show who've been involved in the alien abductions and contact and all that kind of thing. And some of the names that you've mentioned have been mentioned by this group of people, and this kind of crosses the stories together. The Elohim, for example, I know is a biblical race, as is the Nephilim, and a lot of people use these names to describe alien races. You mentioned one earlier, an Indian one. I think you said Bangars or Bingars, I think it was. And you said they were a serpent type, which I think is another word for reptilian. Yeah, these stories seem to cross over somewhat. What are your thoughts?
I'm not too keen on alien abductions, and the reason I'm not is because I think that if a race of aliens were so sophisticated, they would really not need to constantly abduct people for experiments. All they would have to do is take one DNA sample from humans, one abduction, and then they could clone as many humans as they wanted to do as many experiments as they would need. They wouldn't need to sneak out in the middle of the night to get some horny girl and rape her and take away her child. It's crazy. And I support UFOs. I support ancient aliens, but I gotta put my foot down when it comes to alien abductions.
I wasn't really thinking about the abductions per se, but you do make a good point. I mean, for all intents and purposes, why not go to a graveyard and take somebody who's only just died? They put up no fight at all. But no, my thought was, do you think that there's actually a connection between these? Because they are talked about as alien races by some people, and you talk about them as giant races.
There are the image of there are the ancient images of apparent
spacesuits and things floating and levitating items, that kind of thing.
Many of that. Now that particular type of ancient astronaut theory, I support to some extent. I don't believe that they gave culture to the primitive humans, as many ancient astronaut theorists seem to suggest. But I do believe there were ancient astronauts. I do believe they interacted on a very complex level with ancient civilizations here on Earth.
Very interesting.
I believe that the solar system was once abound with civilizations, and that we were kind of a crossroads of civilizations throughout the cosmos. And I think that many different races were visiting Earth at a very early time. In fact, Carl Sagan even alluded this to in his book Intelligent Life, and that was a book written by the Russian physicist, I.V. Shklovsky. And they wrote this book, and he said that it makes sense that at least one time in the 4 billion year history of the Earth, that there was at least 1 to 2 visitations by alien species. Now, Carl Sagan, when he first started out, Carl Sagan was very much into the alien and UFO type phenomenon, but as he evolved as a scholar, he became readily identified with the priesthood of science, as my friend John Anthony West called it, and he became I call him one of the world's greatest doubters. So he's very much against the alien theory, even though he supported SETI to such an enormous extent.
Is it possible that perhaps we're less advanced now than we were back then, and perhaps that's why we're not visited? Maybe we're more savage. Maybe we were more in touch with nature and the stars and ourselves millions of years ago.
Well, I think we're still being visited. I think UFOs are the perfect testament to that. I don't believe that we're not being visited, but at the same time, I do believe we're more primitive now than we were in the past. I think in the past we were highly sophisticated, as I've said repeatedly, and I think that there's ups and downs, there's peaks and valleys, there's a roller coaster of history in which we reach a certain level of technological sophistication, and either through natural catastrophe or our own decision, we were given the decision to adapt, evolve, enter the splendid greatness that awaits us, become a new species, or revert back to a more primitive state. I think every single time that this has happened, we have chosen to revert back to a more primitive state. And that's what happens. And then we go back into that state, and we don't have that connection to our sophisticated past. But I believe in a Terran race. I believe that we're all united on this planet by common evolutionary bonds that go far beyond national, cultural, political, economic, social, and religious backgrounds. I think we are one race. I think one people. I think that divided, we are nothing. We cannot do a thing. But united, we can do anything. We'd be unstoppable. And I think we should think of ourselves as part of a Terran community. I think that we're never going to achieve our full potential unless we have a state on this planet that embraces all those with Terran blood. And that Terran blood is human blood. It is the human might and honor and the human future that we are trying to nurture. And I write about that. I try to create a consciousness for the Terran race, a new view of a new people that will emerge in the future that will be truly united and truly human.
But Pat, imagine if there was a great global catastrophe now within the next year. And 2012, which people have been speaking about. But if so much of the human race was wiped out with only maybe a few 100,000 survivors, maybe not really knowing how stuff works, and starting again,
clueless consumers, what would they make of it?
Yeah.
Well, I kind of think that's a very big possibility, and I agree with fact that we would eventually come to the point where we're going to have to face a new cataclysm, because I believe the cataclysms come every so many.
It seems to have happened before in history. That's the thing we're learning.
Well, yeah, you look at the Mayans themselves who put forward the prophecy. They said that there were 5 existing suns, and this 2012 prophecy will be the end of the 5th sun, and the 5th sun will be the end of their history.
Yes.
And there were suns. These suns are ages. They were seen by both the Aztecs and the Mayans. And like the first sun was a era that was destroyed by water. The second one by fire. The third one by wind. The fourth by another, and the 5th by another. So there was certain cataclysms at each end of these periods that were then revitalized and started again in a cycle that's very similar to the Yuga cycle of India. The Yugas are described in the Sanskrit writings of India as a process in Hinduism of renewal, destruction, and renewal of civilization. It goes on constantly over long periods of time. You also hear of cycles in the writings of Berosus. Are you familiar with Berosus?
No.
Berosus was a 3rd century BC Babylonian priest and scholar. He wrote a book called The 100,000 Years of Man. And that was a book that was in the Great Library of Alexandria. And we've lost the entire book. All we have is a mention of it in the card catalog that survives to this day. We do not have the contents of that. But we have it mentioned from other scholars about the contents of that book. So we do know a little bit about it. And in that book, he describes that humanity existed not 6,000 years as a civilization, not 10,000, not even 25,000, but a whopping 400,000 years from the creation to the time that he wrote the book. And he wrote 100,000 years of kingship during that period in which there was a global ruler. And we'll never learn the contents of that site, but the important thing is that Berosus was highly involved with the idea of cyclical change, that there was period in which there were great levels of sophistication in the human civilization, and then a great drop into darkness and chaos and iniquity, and then a rise once more into greatness and sophistication, and then once again another drop into darkness, and then another rise into sophistication. So there was a change over long periods of time.
Well, Pat, I wonder, when you look at the people, modern people, and you look at consumerism and education, fast food, media, we're becoming dumbed down. I mean, it looks like, are we de-evolving? Or
devolving.
Devolving.
I don't think we're devolving. I think we are evolving, but we need to really consider where we're going to be going from here. We definitely don't want to stay on this planet. We definitely want to explore space. Humanity will either expand or there'll be no humanity. I mean, that is our destiny. I believe that the aliens who came to Earth gave us a basic idea that they wanted us to return to the great community that exists out there, the great promised land of the chosen people. And when I say the chosen people, I'm not referring to the Jews. I'm referring to the Terrans, the humans. And they are the chosen people. They are chosen people who are destined to return to space and fulfill a great destiny. And I think our future evolution lies in space, because when we start to diversify into all these different environments, these different planets, these different moons, these different environments, we're going to be changing morphologically, physiologically, spiritually, intellectually. We're going to be changing in ways that we can't even imagine, and that were not imaginable when we were a one-planet species. But we can evolve if something happens to us in a great cataclysm. But if we exist as a multiplanetary species, it doesn't matter what happens to Earth. Earth can blow and go to hell. But if there are people on Mars and the moon and all these other planets, we're going to continue one way or another. And our ancestors are going to, our descendants are going to live with our memory and carry that on to the next generation.
Pat, I want to leave enough time for you to give details of the books and your website and things, but can you just, we've got about 6 or 7 minutes left, could you just do one last topic, and it's probably the largest of the lost civilizations and the most famous for most people, we'll call it the legend or the myth of Atlantis. You've written about that in your book, Forgotten Worlds. What do you think about Atlantis? I've heard lots of theories about it being a small island off Greece and a few other things. What do you think about that?
Well, I think there were many Atlantises. I think there were many lost civilizations that were very similar to Atlantis. I think the different accounts of Atlantis are not evidence of not knowing where Atlantis is. I think that we're just finding out that there were many different locations for a Atlantis-like civilization. But bottom line, I think that it's more of a metaphor for these many different civilizations, or even more so for a global civilization that once existed, a lost civilization that later on passed what it had learned to a more primitive people, and that primitive people became, in the post-cataclysmic era, the Sumerians and the first people.
Right.
I've got a rather silly question for Pat.
Oh, go on.
You've alluded to Star Trek quite a lot during our interview today, Pat. I was just wondering.
You are not serious.
I'm going to ask a Star Trek question. The original series, Pat, or the Next Generation? Which is better?
No brainer.
You want to know whether? That's a good question. I always liked the Star Trek Next Generation personally, and I was a big Star Trek fan when I was in my teens and 20s, and I had a Star Trek fan club. We had about 100 members. So, yeah, I was a big Trekker.
But the Next Generation, because I'm kind of the original.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, loser.
It's what I grew up with. I
like the Next Generation.
Next Generation, no brainer, seriously.
Pat, what does the future hold for you, and what are you up to in your life at the moment?
Yes, do. Plug, Pat.
Okay, yeah, I got a magazine, a blog magazine, webzine, if you will. It's www.godsandaliensmagazine.com. I recommend you go to that site. It tells you everything you need to know about lost civilizations and ancient secrets.
Good name.
Ancient aliens and so forth. I got a book coming out, Forgotten Worlds. It'll be available on...
We'll put it up on the website, shall we, Mark?
June 24th.
Yeah, okay.
In the United States, I'm sure it'll be also available in the UK, in Europe.
On Amazon?
I also have another magazine, the New Archaeology Review, that's available on iPad. And
so newarchaeologyreview.com.
Yeah, that's an old site. We're trying to revise that site right now. But we also have patchouinard.com and several other sites. So I recommend you go see that and enjoy.
Brilliant. Well, we'll link to all those sites on our website, alternativefutureradio.com, on your interview page, so they can find them easy enough.
And we certainly enjoyed talking to you, Pat. You're such a gentleman, and you're so full of knowledge.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thanks for calling in, Pat. I think we're probably about out of time.
We'd love to talk for longer, but we have another man coming on to speak to us now.
We do. We're busy.
But thank you so much, Pat. And good luck with the book.
No problem.
Good luck with the book.
Thanks, Pat.
It looks great.
Thank you.
It looks very interesting. Thanks a lot.
God bless. Thank you.
Well, that was Pat Chouinard. Did I get that right that time?
I enjoyed myself, and I particularly enjoyed the Star Trek question. You just looked flabbergasted.
I can't believe you seriously asked a Star Trek question.
I'm going to ask every single one of them which is the best, the old or the new. I need to know.
It's clearly the new one. I mean, seriously, who doesn't think that it's the new one?
Is there a better Trek question you think I could ask?
Best captain?
Oh, best captain. No,
best captain.
That's what I'll do from now on.
I liked Picard, but Scott Bakula on the Enterprise one, he was actually pretty good.
Well, there's Captain Kirk all the way for me. We'll see you next time on the Out There Hour.
See you later, everybody.
The Out There Hour on Alternative Future Radio. The Out There Hour with Basil and Mark. www.alternativefutureradio.com.
Yay! Of the caves and barely be able to put things together, needed ancient aliens to come down from the heavens to teach them civilization. I believe that humans already had a substantial civilization and a substantial amount of sophistication in writing, history, engineering, medicine, astronomy. Yeah. And I think that what they were doing is, rather than making things up, that they were writing down eyewitness accounts of what they were seeing, and that's what we have today as myths that have been passed down to us orally from the people who survived the great cataclysmic age of 10,000 years ago. So basically what I think is all the myths and legends that exist in history are in fact true, and that there were in fact beings who evolved on this planet over millions of years who were so powerful and so godlike that we have recorded them in our records as gods and as giants, and we worship them as such, not misconstruing extraterrestrial encounters of giants, but actually seeing real giants that once existed, and that all the myths are telling us that giants were very real, very present, and that there were many
in a million years.
Well, as we were chatting pre-show,
yes.
To sum it up in a nutshell, to put it very simply in one line, we're talking about ancient civilizations.
Ancient, lost, mystery, missing.
And all these amazing and incredible artifacts and remnants all over the globe.
There are some very odd objects that don't quite add up around the world.
And also the evidence of, in the scriptures, in the Old Testament, and even skeletal remains of giants.
Yeah, giants is a fantastic one, Pat. Basil and I were just talking about it actually before we came in the studio. We were talking about the Old Testament, and Basil was telling me how they didn't really teach him much about it at school. And the Nephilim, I think, are mentioned by name.
Nephilim, yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that, Pat, because they're very, very interesting.
Well, first of all, before we go into the Nephilim, I'd like to say a little bit about my theory about giants.
Oh, do, yeah.
And it's a little different than some of the theories you might hear from other people and other scholars and other experts, because I believe that all the myths and legends of history, contrary to being the primitive inventions of a backward and credulous human race who needed to come out.
Oh, there's a lot more than Atlantis and the pyramids.
Yeah.
There's the Ellora in India. It's beautifully intricate. What would you call it? It's not a building. It's like a platform.
Yeah,
it's like something out of Doctor Who.
It's a new one to me, that one.
It's incredible. Oh, well.
Then you've got the biblical alien-type people, like the Nephilim and all that kind of stuff. Because there's a bit of a UFO alien link there going on.
Yes, and all these ancient carvings of space-suited humanoids.
Yes, we shall have to ask him about that.
So we're back to the same question that we've asked, that we've had a few times on this show. Were we an advanced race?
Yes.
Much more advanced than we are now?
Could have been.
Has there been a great global disaster?
Some kind of cataclysm.
Were a few stragglers left behind?
Could have been you. Could have been me.
Could have been me. Is that what we're...
Are we the stragglers? That surely we should be survivors, not stragglers.
Well, survival, but in a whole new system now, it seems, from where we used to be.
Ooh, don't get started. Shall we get him on?
Let's get him on.
Do you know what comes first?
Advert.
Why not help support this station by buying the new Alternative Future Radio and
You're listening to Alternative Future Radio, home of the weird, resting place of the paranormal. Will take you to the furthest reaches of the galaxy and beyond. Strange phenomena, aliens, psychics, cryptozoology, conspiracy, holistic health, and UFOs. Alternative Future Radio, where spooky just got weird.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Out There Hour show. Fantastic guest today. Brace yourselves.
time now for the Out There Hour on Alternative Future Radio. The Out There Hour with Basil and Mark. www.alternativefutureradio.com.
Yay!
Yay! Good morning.
Good evening.
And good afternoon.
Are we going to go through this every time?
No, we're just going to introduce our lovely guest today.
Go on.
Pat Chouinard.
Pat Chouinard.
We're talking about ancient and lost civilizations.
Yeah, more than you would think. People think of Atlantis.
Android application. Not only can you download all the latest shows, but you can go back into time and get the archive shows too, and it's just $1.99. PayPal will bill you in your usual currency if you don't use dollars.
Okay, so hopefully we should now be joined on the line by Patrick Chouinard. Get it right. Pat, do we have you there? Can we call you Pat?
Yes, fine with me.
We weren't sure if you were a Patrick or a Pat.
Patrick is a writer, a freelance journalist, a former producer of Archaeology TV, the editor-in-chief of the new Archaeological Review. He now lives in Florida.
Yes.
Where we're speaking to him at the moment.
How are you doing, Pat?
Hey, I'm doing great. How are you?
We're not doing too bad. Our summer is probably not quite as pleasant as yours, but we're getting through.
So,
well, our summer is very pleasant, but very hot. Very, very hot.
Only wish we had that problem.
98 in the height of summer. Could get higher than that even. So we've got it up to over 100.
You can grow to dislike people, Pat. Oh, we never see 100 here.